we started a new series called I Deserve It. And no, this is not me telling you that you can beg God for a Lincoln Continental and he'll give you one. Okay? It's not what I'm talking about. Everybody, at some point or another, I think, has struggled with, why is this happening to me? Why don't I get what I deserve? This isn't fair. And we start talking about fairness and suddenly realize that life isn't fair. Life throws us curveballs. It causes us problems. And there's nobody, I don't care whether you're a Christian or not, who goes through life without struggles. In fact, the Bible says that believers gain more struggles, that in this have trials and tribulations. How do we deal with it? And how do we deal with learning that God isn't fair? And before you freak out, I don't want him to be fair. And to be truthful with you, I don't think you want him to be fair. Romans 8 says that the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. If God were truly fair, if God was truly fair, yeah, there is, Corey. You're right. We wouldn't show us mercy. And we want God to show us mercy. We want him to forgive us when we screw up. And we screw up all the time. And so if God were fair and we got what we deserved, we'd be reaping the wages of our sin. But God said, I'm sending to die for you, which isn't fair. It's merciful. And I think all of us have been caught at some point. We discovered last week, almost all of us have struggled at one point, or we've been caught in some kind of sin. and, you know, maybe you've been caught lying, or you've been caught gossiping, and certainly when you were a kid, maybe you ate chocolate, and you didn't want mom to know you ate the chocolate, and so when mom caught you, and she says, were you eating the chocolate? And you got chocolate all over your face, you looked at her and said, oh, no, mom, I've never eaten chocolate. No, not me. And you're covered in chocolate, too, and you got busted. And tonight, we're going to look at a woman who got caught in her sin, and I want you to see the interaction here. Now, we're going to be looking at John, and we're going to start in verse 2. And so, at dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him. And he sat down, and the teachers of the law and the Pharisees and a woman caught in adultery. Now, I want you to get your mind about that. Jesus is outside. He's teaching at probably the Gentile courts. He's there. And he's got all these people around him, and he's teaching them. And while he's standing there, while this is all going on, he's teaching the word, and these Pharisees show up. And they're dressed in their full robes. You know, they're wearing their headgear. They've got their tassels hanging down. They're bringing in this woman who was caught in the act of adultery. And chances are, if she was just caught, she was caught in the very act, she probably didn't a whole lot of time. They didn't probably stop and say, okay, pick out an outfit and get dressed and make sure you match. You know, they grabbed her and drug her down the street. And so more likely, if she had anything, she probably grabbed a sheet as they pulled her out of the room. So they've humiliated her. They've drugged her down the street, practically naked. She's been partially covered. She's totally and completely humiliated beyond description. Now, just for the record, I don't know where you're from, and I don't know where you are, but where I'm from, how many does it take to commit adultery? Can you do it? No, you can't. Just word of advice for everybody. You don't have to try it. It takes two, right? And they bring this woman by herself. So I've always wanted to know, where's the dude? wasn't there committing adultery by herself. That's not possible. So it had to be somebody else. So I've always wondered, why didn't he get dragged down there? Why didn't he get dragged down there? And it's hard to say. We don't know all the details. But see, I don't think the point was catching her in adultery. I don't think that she mattered to them one bit. You see, she was guilty, she was caught, but they didn't really care about her. All this was a trap to catch Jesus, to condemn Jesus. I mean, think about the logic here. She's caught in adultery. Now, the Old Testament said that anybody caught in adultery, that means both of them, are to be taken outside the city and stoned. Okay, guys, somebody tell me where the temple is in Jerusalem, or where it was. I'll tell you right now where it is, or where it was, before it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. Right. Where is Mount Moriah, Morgan? Is that on the outskirts of town, or is that near the center of the city? This Morgan's going to answer my geographical questions for me. It's on the Temple Mount, right? Is that on the outskirts or near the center? You know, you have to go by the temple to go outside the city. And I'm going to the answer is no. They purposely took her to the temple. Yeah, there she's at the center. They took her to the center of the city so they could catch Jesus in this. This wasn't about them following the law. This was about them trying to and so they didn't care who they hurt to do it. So they dragged this woman down there. And all the way down there, you know, and she knows that she's condemned, that her life is ruined. She's never going to live it down, never going to love. No one's ever after what they did, you know. You're you know, after all what you did, God is never going to care about you, and God will never love you, and you're goods, and you're pathetic, and you're nothing, and the voices of condemnation, guilt, and shame. And what's interesting to me is that if you don't have to be caught doing something wrong to feel shame, in fact, sometimes shame grows best in the dark. It's when you hold something secret that you really feel guilt and condemnation and shame. And that's her situation. She's dragged down there. Now, she's got a bigger problem because she knows the law too. And she's thinking, I'm going to die. I'm literally going to die. I mean, if we get caught in doing something wrong, we think, oh man, I'm going to die. If anybody ever finds out, I'm just going to die. But in her case, she knew it literally. You know, and we all struggle with that. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we've all got caught in sin, got caught up in something that we shouldn't have done. And we think, I'm never going to do this again. And we go right back to it. You hit a road bump in life and something happens and you're just doing this and you can't stop. And you feel so bad and you feel so much shame. And for some people, you know, maybe it's overspending or overeating, or maybe it's a sexual sin. And you can't afford to pay your bills because you're so busy spending to deal with your issues. And maybe it's substance abuse, or something in a bottle, or something in a can, or something that you shoot up, or something you smoke. And yet it's bigger than you, and you feel dark when you go back to it again, and you keep going back. You just can't seem to escape it. Some of you, it's your temper. You're like, I'm going to unload on my kids again. I'm not going to do that. They weren't at fault, and I'm taking my frustrations out of them, and I'm never going to do it again. And 3 days later, you do it right again. Some of you, it's not even big. Some of you, you look at Pinterest. And, man, I'm a horrible mom. All these people do all these wonderful things on Facebook and Pinterest, and I'm just not a good mom. I can't bake, and I can't organize a closet, and my kids don't even match when they walk out the door. You know, I'm horrible. Whatever it is, you just look at everything else, what everyone else is doing, and you look at what you're not. And you try not to do something wrong, and you end up doing it again and again and again. And eventually you start to think, I'm worthless. Identify myself. And I'm going to tell you right now, some of you are dealing with guilt and shame, and you're not really done anything. Victim. Someone else in a position of authority or power abused you, and yet you internalize the shame. Sometime in your mind, Satan has twisted the events, and you think, well, I must have done something to deserve this. I must have been at fault. It's my fault. I'm dirty. I'm bad. I brought this on myself. You take that someone else did to you, and you think that what they did to you is who you are. Shame, condemnation, and guilt. I did bad, therefore I'm bad, you think. Someone did something bad to me, and therefore I'm bad. This woman, I'm telling you, in a normal context, like she's living today, and she's you, and she has an affair, she's thinking it's over. My husband's never going to love me again. My kids are never going to have anything to do with me. All the women are going to go talk about me and whisper behind my back. She's a husband stealer, blah, blah, blah. For her, it was so much worse. Because whenever she would think like my life is over now, she was literally thinking, I'm about to die. She was being taken out to be stoned. In other words, she wanted to kill her. Quite honestly, at the moment she committed the sin, this was considered to be one of the top 3 worst in Jewish culture. And to commit the sin of adultery was a crime punishable by death. Both parties, but still punishable by death. She's being dragged literally almost like to a trial, and she's thinking, my life is over. And in verse 3, when the Pharisees, scriptures say they made their stand before the group, and they drag her up there and plop her down in the front of Jesus, and they look at Jesus and they say, oh, teacher, the woman was caught in act of adultery. In the law, teacher, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now, what do you say? Now, me, I'm glad Jesus is me, or not. I'm glad I'm not the one responsible for this one. Okay? Because with me, the first thing I would have looked at him and said, I would have looked at him, where's the dude? Because the law says they're both going to be stoned. Okay? You misquoted the law, so I'm going to quote it right back at you. I'd argue with him, but that wouldn't have been helpful. And you ever wonder what it means? You ever heard the taking the Lord's name in vain? Well, guys, I know a lot of people think, well, you take the Lord's name in vain, that means you're using his name as a curse word. Well, right there, when they called him teacher like they did, with the disrespect, yes, that really is taking his name in vain. It's treating as if it's worthless and useless. That's exactly what it means to take God's name in vain, to treat his name as if it's useless, as if it's empty. That's why people use it as a curse word, because it has no value in their minds. Okay? They have respect for God. They use his name in vain for that very reason. So it doesn't have to be a curse word to take his name in vain. Anytime you use God's name or referring to him in any way where it is empty of real meaning, you're just using the words. So they look at him and say, well, what do you say? Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. They don't care a lick about her. They don't care what she really did. All they wanted to do was get leverage on her, to leverage her to hurt and trap and trick Jesus. Because if he said, yeah, you're right, that's what the law said, and stone her, then you have 2 problems. One, he loses his reputation for being loving and full of mercy, right? I mean, doesn't sound very merciful. He says, yeah, go ahead and stone her. At the same time, he's also telling them to disobey Roman law. They weren't allowed to execute anybody. They knew it. Roman law said that Romans were the only one allowed to execute. Guess what? Which is probably the reason the guy wasn't with him, because they could get away with killing a woman in that culture. But the Romans would have stopped them from stoning a man to death. Would do a violation of the law. So if Jesus says, well, yeah, go ahead and stone her, back to the Roman Empire and say, guess what? Guess what? Jesus is telling us to break the law. He's telling us to kill people. Right? Get him arrested. But on the other hand, if he says, well, no, let's not act too quickly here. We should forgive her. Then they say, oh, Jesus is adultery. He's saying it's okay. He's breaking the law of Moses. So there doesn't seem any way that he can answer this question without them turning it on. And that's what they thought. The verse 6 tells us that they were doing that. It's exactly what they were up to. So they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing Jesus. But Jesus was always prepared. John says this, and Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. Picture this. Here's this woman full of shame, thrown before him, probably at his feet, standing there. Pharisees are all staring at him. They've asked him this serious question and are waiting on an answer. And Jesus kneels down and starts scribbling on the ground. And he starts writing something down. Now, of course, that raises the question, right? I mean, the answer is we don't know for sure. Nobody knows. For centuries, scholars have been debating about what he wrote down. And we don't know, I'll tell you that, but there are many scholars who suggest that Jesus was writing down the sins of the men who were accusing the woman. And there's two reasons they believe that. Number one, because Jesus begins to write, and the word they use there is katagraphin. Now, there's two words that mean to write something down. One is graph, and the other one is katagraphin. Graphin means to write down, and kata means against. And katagraphin means to write down something against someone. The word that's used in this text is the word katagraphin. So whatever Jesus was writing down, he was writing down something against someone. Perhaps he was writing down the sins of the men who were accused. Now, there's another part to this, because he says, they jump at him and, okay, you know, and I think that would have made me nervous. Because Jesus is sitting down writing their sins on the ground. We don't know that for sure, but that seems to be what's going on here. And finally, they kept questioning him, and he straightens up and he says to them, all right, if any of you are without sin, let any one of you who is without sin be first to throw the stone at her. Now, get the context. Jesus, should we go ahead and kill her? Right. Stands up. If any of you never sinned, go ahead. Here's your rock. You can go first. Now, in the Greek language, what's there, translated as someone who is without sin, the text actually means not only are you without sin, but you've never even wanted to sin. I mean, think about that. If you never sinned, throw the stone. But only if you've never did it, if you never ever wanted to do it, throw the first stone. And Jesus says, verse 8 says, he stooped again and wrote on the ground. He's writing again the second time. Now, there's some scholars who believe it was without this sin. And what he's talking about is adultery. And some scholars believe that this woman was